Okay, you ready?
Yeah, it's been like 3 weeks since we've done this. I don't know. I feel like a deer on the ice. I'm all wibbly wobbly.
Yes, that's a saying that people have. That that's that's something people say.
I say it.
Uh,
So yeah, people say it. People being me, I say that. Great. Glad we've cleared that
okay.
up. Hot
Well,
start.
you said you had something
I do. I
to
got
start
something.
with. I got something for you, but mine's probably pretty short, so we can circle back to mine.
Okay.
Let's let you get started. Let's let the doctor lead. What do we
Well,
got
let's
here?
baby deer on ice. Okay. So the other day when we were doing pitching stuff with our guys, right? We have a few guys that we've really been working on. Arm action has been like the biggest thing we've been working with them because they've had such poor sequencing that even if we could get them to replicate throwing strikes or whatever, it was kind of a exercise in futility. There was no real benefit to like doing that, right? So they were good at throwing strikes, but the process of getting the strikes to the zone was so inefficient and just it was like there was no way to go up. We could be one second. We could be the best strike throwers in the world, but at 71 miles an hour with no movement as a senior in high school, like you're never gonna sniff the field, right? So I was just we're like almost 8 weeks in, right? So we're like we a lot of this has been cleanup, building volume, building intent, building resiliency, and realistically, dude, until like 2 weeks ago, I was like, we messed up. I was like, none of this is, none of the guys were peaking really well. Like none of the guys were moving fast. And then all of a sudden, in the last like 2 weeks, we have a bunch of guys hitting random PRs on like Wednesday nights. Like, back to like the stuff that we're used to seeing when guys like adapt. It
Yeah.
felt like the adaptation period took a little longer. But let me get back to the point. Okay, so we have this kid in there, and he's sitting what his former top velocity was, Sam, right?
Yep.
And he's kind of all over the place. He hasn't thrown a lot of strikes, and I really hadn't put a lot of focus on it because we made such a large change in just how he moved that I was more worried about him just getting comfortable with moving down the mound and feeling things, and the result not being as important as like the feel out of his hand. And then from there, my thought was like, okay, if he can get consistent with the feel, then we can bring him back into the zone of just like being confident in how he moves.
Yep.
You stood there and you were like, you need to get the ball down in the zone because that does us no good. Like what you are doing right now does us no good. And then I said, I was like, well, we're still, and this is all happening right in front of our guys. And this is not the first time you and I have
Nope.
had this kind
Yeah.
of exchange in front of our dudes, even with Graham, we'll like, or with Zimmerman, the same thing. And I thought it was good that we were like, well, I don't know, like we should figure it out. And we came to the resolution. What was the resolution we came to? Like
Well,
the way
I
you
think that
stated it, the way you stated it at the end, as far as like the concept of throwing strikes, how you put it, I think is very. You got to say that again because I can't remember exactly how you put it, but it was perfect.
Yeah, well, the way I put it when we were kind of debating it was if we ignore it completely, then it is kind of the motor learning equivalent of having a hitter practice hitting by taking dry swings. Uh, and you can get him to move the way that you want him to move all day. But if there's no connection to the external environment at all, then the motor skill isn't really going to be something that's useful down the road. We have to have some element of that, even if they're not real successful at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's an important caveat here. I think people, when they're going to hear us discuss this, they're going to think like, oh, well, they have to be commanding the ball really well for it to like count. That's not really what we're saying. What we're saying is there has to be some percentage of your focus, of your attention, that's directed towards trying to throw the ball to a certain spot, certain area, trying to command it. Now, you may fail at it for some time when you're repatterning an arm action or a internally focused motor skill, right? But if no attention is directed towards how that motor skill is affecting your environment, then it is not going to, you're not going to be able to snap your fingers
Mm-hmm.
and just execute that down the road. you kind of have to carry that thread of attention through the skill. There are certain things where it's obvious, right? Like if I'm a hitter, I am going to be hitting a baseball to be working on hitting. Even if I'm working on my swing, I'm usually hitting a baseball. Now, this could open the whole can of worms, the debate about tee work and front toss and machine and live arm and whatever. I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna say this about batting practice and hitters because I've had this debate with people whose intelligence I really respect, and I think
I want to
there's
have this.
this.
I want to hear your thought on it because I have a very personal thought on it because are like two quick interjection and then right back. There are like two phases in my career as a baseball player where I spent a lot of time doing one thing, and then I switched and I spent a lot of time doing the other thing, and there was a drastic change in the outcome.
Mhm.
Back to you.
So there are people who are sort of fall under the ecological school of thought with motor learning, right? And I would say I generally fall under that category. I think that to me makes the most sense. But what those guys will often talk about is connecting to relevant information in the environment around you. And if you're connecting to information that is irrelevant to the game, then it won't work translating to being actually better at the game. Example, hitting off of a pitching machine won't make you a better hitter in a game because that you're not looking at the same information as a person throwing the ball, the arm action, the timing, the visual, right? And to that, I would, a lot of guys have talked to me about like practice design in baseball and like you should do a live arm as often as possible. And I'm like, okay, yeah, as often as possible. Agreed. But that's not that much. Like
Right.
that's what I think people don't realize. Like I remember saying to somebody, I was like, look, man, there are 20,000 swings that happen in my facility on like a week to week basis.
I would argue
You,
there might be 10,000 swings sometimes in a night.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's not,
Easy.
we, I could probably, I mean, we have the hit tracks data. We could just take that one cage and then multiply it times four. I don't know. I haven't looked at the numbers, but it easily could be 10,000 in a day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so you find me a BP thrower who can throw all those pitches, and we'll we'll do overhand BP for everybody, right?
Right.
Like a pitching machine is the next closest thing
Mm-hmm.
to being able to replicate that because of the ball behavior through the air is pretty close, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was just complimenting our hitting coach Luke Roscom last night on his environment design. He has great instincts for this. We have 4 cages. One cage was high velocity fastball machine, challenging velocity. The other cage was curveball. The other cage was a live arm. They did have somebody throwing. And then one cage was a left-handed fastball where he took the machine, moved it about 4 feet to the left, to the right of the hitter, right? If you're facing
Mm-hmm.
the pitcher to the right. So, and then he made everybody feed it with their left arm.
That's genius.
So it's coming in, at the angle that a left-hander would be throwing it at, and they're
Genius.
seeing it come out of a person's left hand into the machine. It's like it's as close as you can get
Mm-hmm.
with any semblance of pragmatic practice design, like
Yeah.
pragmatism.
There you go.
There it is.
Yeah.
Like it's completely impractical to think like you're going to be able to like completely replicate game
Yeah.
information all the time. So bring it back to pitching, which is the
Mm-hmm.
original point. We're thrown to a 9 pocket. We're doing some of this stuff. You could make an argument that just throwing it in the zone is close enough when you're first relearning kind of an action, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you literally closed your eyes and threw it in that general direction, that's definitely a problem, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that anybody's actually doing that.
I would hope not.
However, depending on how high level the athlete is, I think that it is doing the athlete a disservice of his own ability and athleticism and his compensation capabilities if you don't at least kind of like cut the zone into halves, right? Like this particular pitcher we're talking about is like he's a very tilted spin axis guy. He's a sink. He's got a lot of sink, right? His stuff is gonna play down in the zone. He's left-handed. If he throws it up in the zone, his he gets dead zone really quick. His fastball flattens out, it gets really dead zone. And I was telling him, okay, this is great, but you need to understand, like, your stuff is down in the zone stuff. So it's good for you to have that mentality. And I asked him, I was like, are you throwing it just to the zone or to a specific area in the zone? And he's like, I don't know, I'm just there, just over there. And I said, you should probably try to get it down in the zone. Like, why don't you throw fastballs until you just get one down in the zone, right? And that was sort of the genesis of our debate, because you were kind of just happy that he was hitting the strike zone. He was hitting the very top bar of the strike zone a lot.
Yeah.
Which is fair, right? Because we've definitely seen a lot worse, right? I mean, we've seen guys, they're trying to repattern their arm action and they're spiking at 38 feet and they're missing, like, it's a complete dumpster fire, right?
I mean, I watch some of our higher level guys bounce balls at like 50 feet sometimes because their brains just shut off. And I'm like,
yeah,
what's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely.
But no, I like to that kid's credit, that was a guy that had problems throwing strikes, period. Like committed hard strikes, like just throwing the ball and having confidence in throwing the ball and like trusting his feel, right? The other thing that you said the other night that I thought was very astute was the fact that you personally are a guy who's had problems with like being in the zone when you've thrown in the past. And this is bias. So this is something that I needed to recognize earlier. I've never really had issues with throwing strikes. It's just a feel thing for me. I just throw them. I don't even have to look at the zone. Like I can just, based purely upon feel, I know where the ball is going. Like when the catcher's set up for me on glove side, I don't like really care to look that much. I know what it's going to feel like out of my fingers when I get it to that side of the plate. Like I know exactly what the sequencing is going to feel like, how my front, like all those things, right? And I believe that there are some pitchers, like we have a guy in our program right now, Wrigley, mm-hmm. because of how his brain works. If you tell him to focus on throwing strikes, he's terrible. Mm-hmm. If you tell him to focus on being connected and feeling, he's in the zone all the time. So I think there are two different parts of it, right? But for me to not recognize that earlier, especially in this specific case for this guy, because I was like, hey, dude, you need to feel when you get to this point. Because I would argue even Graham Anderson's another guy that has never really had issues throwing strikes as like an adult, and he talks about it the same way, and so does Zimmerman. So to have someone like you in there to be like, hey, dude, you're having a hard time like getting it in the zone. Focus on this, like just this piece, which is this is part of like the evolution of like you learn something new every day, even though you've been doing this for a long time. Like that is a perspective that I completely removed, which is like I said, it's a bias that I had. So to have another set of eyes is a huge benefit. And I totally agree. Like, I think that not that Sam wasn't throwing at the strike zone. We never didn't have him throwing at a target. He was throwing to a target generally. But we are at the point now this year, like we just did our first session the other day where we were legitimately focusing on sequencing primary off speed off of where a fastball is thrown. Like that's what we did for the whole session. It was like 20-ish throws of like throw something, repeat it, throw something, repeat it, throw something, repeat it, right? And Sam had a fantastic session. Graham goes, he was tremendous. In the words of Graham Anderson. But it's sometimes it takes another set of eyes who wasn't maybe a pitcher, who has experienced other things, to bring that part to it and be like, hey man, you need to focus on this, not just the feel of it. So that was a good credit. And I think you're totally right. Like we are at the point now, we're still early enough that we need to be taking some of these guys that we've made large changes in their sequencing and how they move and be like, hey dude, here's how your stuff is going to work. Here's where we're at. So I thought that was a good conversation we had the other evening. And it was productive.
Yeah. As coaches, we are like attention traffic controllers. We are standing in the intersection of all of the attention that an athlete could give, and we are directing traffic. We're waving this guy through, and we're holding this guy up. Like, hang on, don't pay attention to that. You don't need that's noise, right? Like, and I think a lot of times that it sounds so simple when you put it that way. Like coaches are attention traffic directors, but there's a real art to it. And you have to know, this is why it's so important to like get to know the people that you work with and like a human level, because it's very difficult to know where to direct their attention if you don't know how they interpret information.
Dude, say that,
And
put that on a freaking t-shirt and sell it to everybody. That is so accurate. Like, oh, that is so accurate. Because you can give cues
and
all day, but the cues mean nothing unless they're the right one for the right
right,
individual at the right time.
right. And people talk about cues. Like, I think one of the dorkiest coachisms in the world is when coaches start debating cues as if this is my favorite cue. Like, dude, you're not casting spells. Like, it's not everything you say is just directing attention, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you could say the same thing to one kid and then the same thing to another kid, and they'll interpret it completely differently just based on how they are interpreting the environment around them, their ability for high level, low level attunement, where their individual bias is, because every athlete is going to have a bias towards internal focus or external focus,
Yep.
right? The really great compensators are going to be biased towards external focus. The guys who are really busy trying to do it correctly, right? The coachable kids, air quotes, quote unquote coachable, they're going to be biased towards internal focus because they're trying to make you happy. And that's a whole. I mean, I could talk about this for a long time. Like, there's
But
a
then
lot of kids out there that they have what I call toxic coachability, where they want to be coachable.
Shout out to Sam. Just
Yeah,
be
I
a
mean,
dog, dude. Just like tell me to fuck off and just go do what you want
yeah.
to do, please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's great. It's coachability is great, but kids are so busy trying to do what they think you want them to do that they forget to be good at the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's internal focus bias. They're forgetting that the whole goal is to make the thing happen. Hit the ball hard to the outfield, throw the ball where you want it in the zone, make the curveball move a lot, whatever it is. They're not even paying attention to the result of their motor movement. They just are paying attention to your reaction. It's I call it like rubbernecking. They like take a swing or throw a ball and then they whip their head around and they go like, was that like that? Was that good?
Good.
And like it's like a trigger word for me when an athlete says like that. Like that? No. Oh my God. I want to punch you right in the shin. Like, I can't, it makes me so mad so fast. I can't handle it. But
Yeah.
I had a better point with that other than complaining. We're directing attention, and some guys, as you mentioned, are going to do a really great job working backwards from the result. And some guys need to pay attention to what they're doing in order to create the result. And this is where I think coaches who were really great players oftentimes struggle transitioning into coaching because it seems obvious to them.
Mm.
Stuff that's really obvious to good players or really talented players or guys that were very successful, it's not obvious to your average 17, 18, even a college kid. Like, it's not, you can't assume it's obvious to everybody. And that's one of the things that I've noticed transitioning to spending more time coaching pitchers versus hitters, given that I pitched at a lower level and I hit at a higher level. It's much easier for me to get inside the head of a kid who doesn't know what he doesn't know. With hitters, I would get frustrated sometimes, and I'd be like, I don't know, man, just fucking hit it. Like, why are you making this so hard? Hit the ball hard to the back net. Did you hit it hard to the back net? No. Try doing that next time. Like, stop making it so hard. Rotate your fucking body and hit the ball hard.
Just whack it,
like,
dude.
Like that? You swung and missed. No, not like that. What? And so it's easier, I think, for a really good player to get frustrated and not understand the headspace of a kid who doesn't get it yet, right? And I emphasis on yet. It doesn't mean kids can't get it, but you don't even know. Like, you're trying to direct traffic in direct attention. You've never even been there. You don't know the map, and so because you were too good, you were too talented to even understand what this kid is going through, and that's something of irony, I think, where like you need to have played to be at some level to be a good coach, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you were too good, you're going to be a bad coach.
Yeah.
If you were, you know what I mean? Because you're not going to understand what it's like to struggle.
I think like I got like you, I was lucky enough that I hit at a high level for a short amount of time, but I did it just because I was naturally good at swinging and hitting the ball. Like I didn't work on it. I didn't like really give it a lot of time, right? And I realized that hitting for me was not the thing that I was going to be able to understand. It still isn't something that I understand very well. Like my hitting philosophy is see ball, hit ball. That's just what I
Yep.
do, right? But in pitching, I learned so much of that struggle through the injuries I went through. Like
Mm-hmm.
learning again, like relearning how to throw when you go from something and then you completely change how you throw to avoid it. And then you come back to it and you're like, why am I not the way that I was before? But you're dead on as far as like you have to have played, you have to have experienced the times where things were really hard because you have to have been able to have pulled yourself out of that to get back to where you were before. Or you can't just always be down, right? So it's like it's the same thing with these kids, right? We're taking a huge skill, we're breaking them down into something that they suck at, we're bringing them back up, and then we're bringing them down, bringing them up, and bringing them down. It's the same thing. It's periodization, right? So we're literally like,
Mm-hmm.
you can't. It's up, down, up, down, up, down, and then they want to just be up, 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 up all the time. Like a perfect example is Everett. The other day was like, dude, I can't. I'm not throwing hard. I'm like, yeah.
Bless his heart.
I was like, yeah, of course you're not. And he goes, I'm not throwing any harder. I'm like, dude, it's December.
Yeah.
And you
Bless
move
his
like
heart.
I was like, and you move like
Yeah.
shit. And he goes, I know. And I'm like, okay, so what are we doing? And he goes, I'm not sure. I'm like, we're learning how to move better so that our ceiling can go up. We're becoming more efficient. And he goes, right, right. And he goes, okay, okay. I'm like, just trust me, man. It's the same. It's the Raul Vaz effect of last year,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
throwing 75 miles an hour. It's like, yeah, dude, we're completely relearning how to move. We're
Yeah.
taking we aren't putting the training wheels or like the training wheels on. We're taking them off, and we're
Mm-hmm.
saying, good luck. Go downhill. Let's see if you can
Yep.
make it to the bottom without crashing. And that's
Yep.
kind of but that model, I believe in like my heart of hearts, that model is the best way to force adaptation and learning,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the sense of like being able to interact with your entire environment versus if we constrain it too much, then it's like really hard to like learn because these guys are still so neuroplastic that if you can just let them kind of, get through the weeds and like step in the mud and fall down a few times, like eventually they'll figure out how to balance and then they'll realize that
Mm-hmm.
they can just stand up all the way and look over the top of the weeds and know where they're going. Right.
Yep.
So yeah, no, it is fun to like work with these guys. The one other thing I was going to say is I do, like when you see me like grab a kid, I'm like, okay, lift your leg. And I like
Mm-hmm.
hold them. I
Mm-hmm.
think those feels do help a lot of guys who can't, like the cueing doesn't work for them and constraint doesn't work for them. If you
Mm-hmm.
can make them feel something a little bit, it's just like when Spencer just put up a video of him having guys start like on a stool so they can feel what it's like to
Yeah.
like actually load into their hip.
Yep.
But you do that and then you have them move without that constraint.
Yep.
You don't do it and be like, okay, now do it with this because that's
Yeah.
too many training wheels. It's too much help, and then
Yeah.
they never learn the skill. So
Well,
yeah,
it's going back to our conversation with Yuji on the last episode, where you have to understand the difference between constraining to constrain and constraining to afford. Like you're constraining to afford the opportunity to move in the way that you want them to move. You're not constraining just for the sake of constraint,
right.
right? That stool drill is a great example of constraining to afford because it's a constraint just kind of at the beginning, but it still affords the opportunity to move with some dexterity and some adjustability, right? When you like grab onto the guy and like hold his body weight as he moves down the mound and you like show him what by the way, one of my favorite visuals at pitchers training, whenever we have a group of kids in there and I look over and you've got like your arms wrapped, it looks like you've got three arms whenever you're doing that, like you've got it wrapped around the kid, you're like, do you feel that? Like,
I'm cradling
yeah,
a
you're like,
6'5" guy. And I'm like, do you
yeah,
feel what this
it's like
is like?
it's a 6'6", 17-year-old, and you're
Do you
like
feel
cradling
safe?
him in your arms.
Do you feel safe here?
But it really goes to show that like motor skill learning is a sensory experience. It is. I
Yes.
oftentimes try to explain this to people, and one of my favorite ways to like think through this concept is I'll say to the kid, I'll go, okay, listen, man, you got to feel it. Let's use this as an example. You have a friend. He was blind from birth. He's never seen anything. You have to. He asks you to describe the color green to him. how do you describe it?
What a concept.
And they stare at me and they're like, most people will say like, well, I'll say it's like the color of grass. And I'm like, he's never seen grass. He doesn't know what that looks like. And they're like, oh, that's weird. You can't. And I'm like, you can't. You have to have seen, like, every way that you describe the color green is going to come back to having seen something green, right? Like, he's never seen anything. You can't describe green. I said, same concept. Let's bring that to like the sense of touch. You got a guy he's born with that disease where he has no sense of touch. He can't feel anything. He wants to know what hot feels like. How do you describe it? And they're like, it hurts. I'm like, he doesn't know what hurts is. He can't feel anything. He's numb.
It's
It's
an
weird.
impossible
You can't.
task. Task.
It's an impossible task because everything that we know about sensory experience is based on experience. It's based on our memory of other things. You're connecting dots about sensation. And the only way to learn a new movement is to experience that sensation in your own body. You can looking at it helps, right? Like you see yourself on video. We've seen that work a lot, right? Everybody who's probably ever tried that in coaching has seen that help. Seeing yourself on video is super helpful, but that's another sensory experience. So you're stacking sensations, right? Your eyes, your ears, your nose, your sense of touch. These are all like sensations that you can stack to inform new motor knowledge, right? And I'm drifting towards like the motor program method. Ecological guys don't come after me, but like, I would argue there's this famous example of in the ecological school of thought of like schooling fish or like birds, like patterning and flocking, right? And they're talking about how they're so sensory connected to each other that they can react almost before the other one moves, and that's how they can move as like a unit like that. I would argue that if you had one of those birds or fish that was missing one of its sensory organs, its eyes, its vestibular system, some way, they would not be able to school or flock that same way because those instincts, that attunement to the environment around them, is based entirely on their ability to interpret those sensations. And so if a kid has never experienced that sensation, then it's going to be very hard for him, right? And that's why it's so hard to learn motor skills. That's why it's so hard to learn a new movement. It's so hard to make your swing better, to throw better. And that's one of the great things about plyo balls, because it's a loud sensory input, right? The weight itself constrains your movement, but it's also a much louder sensory input. You notice when there's that much more weight in your hand, you notice it. It insists upon itself. Like you can't ignore it. Same when you take a kid and you like walk his hands through the thing. Um, he can't ignore that that's happening, really, right? Now you can't just like passively. Like I saw this thing recently where it was like a big robot arm and had a golf club attached to it.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And people were holding on to it, and it's like, I can do Rory McIlroy's swing, and it was patterning the club exactly like Rory. And there were some people in the comments that were like, if you just did this, you'd become a good golfer, right? And I'm like, well, no, because your body is different than his, and it's only moving the club, and you're just getting pulled through the club.
Yeah,
like your body isn't. So it's not. It's an incomplete picture, right? That's sort of like saying like I can learn to drive by like looking at the steering wheel. Like it's not. It's like 4% of the sensation and the experience, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just not quite the same. But my point here is that the word like sensory motor is really important, I think, for all of us to kind of keep in mind. Like motor skills and sense in your 5 senses are never separated. Mm-hmm. It's not something that you can separate. They exist in the same bucket. And I think paying attention to that helps you inform constraint-led learning and build environments for success that are going to afford them the opportunity to experience those new sensations, right? And that's the big failure of the toxic coachable kid. He's not paying attention. He has outsourced his sensation to you. He's hoping that you'll tell him whether or not he felt it, It's like,
Help
like
me.
that. It's like, I don't know. How'd that feel? I don't know. I don't know how it felt. I thought you'd tell me,
I don't live in your body,
and
bro.
it's like, I don't know, man. I don't even know how I feel.
It's funny because so in the chiropractic, like when I get an intern, right, or I get somebody that I'm teaching to like palpate, adjust, like just be better with their hands. They come in and they'll like I got this gal right now, bless her soul, and she had a very poor um, mentor before, whoever she was working with, and then she came over, and every time she adjusts, she looks at me, and I'm like, "What do you want me to do?" And it was like there was one time she was working on Derek or one of the other, it was like Megan or somebody, right? Or she was adjusting me, and she like did it, and I was like, "Okay, how was it?" She was like, "I'm like, I don't live in your body, right?" And so like for them, like when I teach adjusting or palpation, like a lot of times all like the first time, especially when I'm teaching like a cervical manipulation or something like that, where it's purely a feel thing. It really is. Like adjusting is not mechanical. It's purely like it's feeling feeling that person's energy, feel your energy, like how the spaces, the environment, how they're feeling, what's going on with them, how cautious they are, if they're relaxed. It's all these variables, right? It's
Mhm.
thousands of these little inputs, and you have to just allow those to come to you. Because if you try and impart, or like if you try and force something, it's gonna suck. It's not gonna feel good. It's the same thing as like interacting with environment and throwing. Like if you try and force your body to do something, you're gonna be like, what was that? Like none of
Mhm.
it's going to feel good, right? Like we're going through that with like Totten right now. We're trying to get him to like just move in a different way, and he'll be like, that wasn't good. I'm like, great, okay, let's try a different thing. But in
Mhm.
adjusting, a lot of times I'll literally put my hands like over the whoever I'm teaching, and I'll adjust with their hands underneath my hands, so they can feel like what the pressure's like and how things move. And same thing,
Mhm.
like when we go to palpate, like I'll put my hands like above their hands, and like like what pressure, like how it feels. And that's the only way to learn that stuff. And the hard part
Mhm.
is a lot of people in general, when they're trying to learn these like high level skills, not that it pertains just to sport, but even in life, like if you're a good example is like if you've never been in, if you're from a country where driving is not common, and you come to a country that is common to drive in, and you don't know how the flow of traffic works, and like just you just know the rules of driving, you're gonna suck at driving. Like you're really gonna be bad at it.
Yeah.
It's the same thing
Yeah.
as anything else when it comes, like you said, sensory motor learning. It's like you have to take all of these inputs, right? And you have to know what it feels like to be in like a zone where you can be accepting of all that information and
Mhm.
still react and put information back into the environment as well. Which I
Mhm.
think, and that's just time. Like that takes so much time unless you're just like incredibly gifted. But even then, even if you're incredibly gifted, you still have to, like a perfect example, we were talking about this the other night, Paul Skeens being an amazing hitter,
Yeah. Yeah. We were talking about that the other night.
incredibly gifted, but also like an amazing rotational athlete.
Yep.
So like it makes a lot of sense that, oh, the dude whacked baseballs. Yeah, he naturally rotates well. He receives information and puts information out. Like he does that really well. But I would guarantee that kid has been hitting since he was 4.
Yeah.
Like as soon as he could
Yeah.
stand, it's the same
Yeah.
thing. Like when you watch elite golfers, like they've been swinging a golf club for. You don't just like happen to get onto the PGA Tour because you picked up a club 2 years ago. Like you've been swinging it for 5 decades, essentially,
Yeah.
like neurologically because of all the reps you've had. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a little point that we touched on that I want to like mention, sort of segue backwards to. It's really interesting to me how when we train for velocity, you usually see it happen in these chunks. I find that fascinating, and I think
We've hit on this
um,
before, but it is unbelievable because you don't see. I feel like it doesn't happen in like sprinting.
it. Well, I don't know.
I guess I've
I'm
never
not
worked
even
with
gonna.
any track athletes. I don't know. I
I'm
shouldn't have
not
said
a.
that.
I'm not even gonna say because I'm not a track guy.
Mhm.
I've seen it kind of happen in speed training with field sport athletes, um,
It
but
happens. It
not the
happens in
same way
weightlifting. It happens in weightlifting with novices.
with novices. Yeah, sure, but like we see it that it happens that way with everybody with
Yeah,
pitching that we've seen. Like it's nothing, 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 4 miles an hour. And you're
Yeah.
like, Jesus. And then what's really fascinating about that is it's not a fluke.
Yeah.
Their floor moves. Like we've seen it happen where we've had a kid can't get to 80, can't get to 80, can't get to 80, like weeks. He's just banging his head against the wall. And then one day he comes in and he throws 84 and everything is above 80 that day.
Mm-hmm.
He PRs and then he sits at and above his PR. Like his entire window of output moves relatively suddenly. It
Yeah.
and I know my instinct is that that's neurological in some way, right? But that's really like hand wavy to just be like, ah, it's neurological. Like what it's fascinating to me, and I don't feel like I even have, like, maybe somebody out there has the physiological knowledge to be able to explain the mechanism behind that, but I don't feel like I do right now. And
Who
right, so
do
right
we?
now I just marvel at it. I just think it's like the coolest thing ever.
We should find
But it's,
somebody who knows that answer and interview
we
him.
need to
That would be
find a
fascinating.
neuroscientist.
Yeah, but I
Um,
do think it's neurological, but I also think some of it sometimes it's just like having the mental capacity to think that you can actually move at that rate.
yeah, like
Like,
self belief is obviously like,
yeah, part of it.
but
Yeah.
that's the nervous system thing. Okay,
Hmm.
I got another thing for you.
Quick, cool. I got about 15 minutes, so
All
we're
right,
dialed.
okay. Um, it's kind of bad news. I have kind of bad news for you.
Okay.
I regret to inform you that I think I'm changing my mind about water bags.
Okay.
I think I think so. I've like very publicly shit on water bags before.
Mhm.
However, um, here's my current stance, my current position stance, official
Sure.
statement on
Can't
water
wait until this
bags.
changes again.
I think the application of them is still really eye washy in many ways.
Mhm.
You see the, like, especially those circular ones where you see a guy's like on a mound, he like shakes it around, and he's
Yeah.
like and then he like throws it,
Mhm.
like, all right, settle down.
Right.
However, we have a couple of those tubular water bags in our weight room right now, and they've been sitting in the corner gathering dust because somebody else bought them a while back, and I'll look at them and I'll be like, stupid, every now and then. But then the other day, like, I get bored with training. I do training all day, like, and I do training. I've been doing training all day, every day for like 8 years, and so my own training I get really bored with it. So the other day, I grabbed it and I was holding it above my head, and doing overhead loaded rear foot elevated split squats with both arms above my head. And I've been dealing with this rotator cuff strain, and so I've been trying to do more like dynamic stability with my shoulder. That exercise I liked a lot, and I was like,
Damn
damn it,
it.
I like that. And so
Yeah.
then, then I decided to like do like I added more water to it, made it heavier, and I was doing like carries. I was like walking with it,
Mhm.
and then I was like, all right, I bear hugged it, and I started doing like rotation stuff, and I like it helped me feel rhythmic, dynamic co-contraction in a kind of a unique way.
Mhm.
Um, I still feel like the water is maybe a little too random
Sure.
for some people. Rhythmic co-contraction is probably better in like the shoulder tube. I still think is probably a better tool than like the water bags. Or there's those little balls that you can hold in your hand that have
The
another little
shoulder,
ball
the
inside,
shoulder
and you're
sphere.
like
I want one so bad. I think
you're like
that if if we're talking rhythmic co-contraction, if we're talking purely for the sake of, it's like I like the shoulder tube. I think it's fine. Um, I don't use it that much, but I don't like, I load a lot of that rhythmic co-contraction stuff into my training. Like I do a ton of like drop catch speed rows. I do a ton of like eccentric speed. I do a ton of like
mm-hmm.
that stuff. I can, like, that kind of rhythmic stuff innately I'm good at. But I think I like the idea that the water bag, like, here's what I think is the eye wash part of the water bag. If we're trying to learn a skill, you're not throwing a water bag.
Yeah.
It's not going to be on you
Yes.
on the mound. So
Yeah.
doing hours of that is a waste of time. If you use it as a primer, like Teddy Jaguar has been doing it a lot primer wise, and it seems to be helping his lower half sequencing, I'll say this: his upper half has been dog shit. So, do I? But is maybe is his upper half worse because his lower half is more efficient and his upper half doesn't know how to move with a lower half that's actually efficient? Like there are a lot of variables. He's also going through a lot of stuff like in life right now. Like there's a lot going on. The kid's a dog. Put it on him.
Yeah.
But I think the shoulder sphere has a lot of like value to it. And then I think the water bags could be useful because like I love sandbags, like heavy sandbags because you're interacting with something that's moving. You know, it's something that isn't just like you're picking up a rock and lifting it. It's like sliding all over the place, and you have to find positions like a water bag does. You have to find positions to like support it. But I do agree in the sense that the water I think is too. If it was more dense, so you could like actually react in time because it's probably moving so fast that unless you're going for like a speed type thing, is it even? I've never done any of this, so I'm just like
I felt like it was moving too slow, to be honest. Like in some cases, like when I was holding it still, it's moving plenty fast. But when I was like whipping it around, I felt like it was too slow.
Okay.
You know, maybe it's probably plenty fast for some people, but you know, being that I'm a good rotator and I'm at fairly my motor skill bias is towards like twitchy.
It is all twitchy. You don't have
it took
just a
too
bias.
long for it to. It took too long for it to slosh to the other side of the tube. I wanted the tube to be smaller or something. You know, like the water took too long to get over there. I was already ready to whip back the other way. By the time it hit the end of the tube, I'm like halfway back. So
I like using bands for that, like a reactive tail off or something like
bands
that.
Bands
because
are
the
great
tension,
bands are faster than gravity.
Bam, bam, bam.
Yeah,
you get that the tension.
By the
hits, way, and you can come right back like that.
Yeah, I feel like we should define co-contraction a little bit. We're just like throwing that around, and somebody listening might not know. So I've been explaining this to the athletes a lot lately, and here's how I do it. So if you're listening right now, look at your elbow.
Listen closely.
If you want your elbow to bend, you're gonna flex your bicep. Your bicep flexes, your elbow bends. If you want your elbow to extend, you flex your tricep. Okay, but what if you want your elbow to stay exactly 90 degrees and not move? You're going to flex both your bicep and your tricep together equally. That's co-contraction. They are cooperatively contracting to stabilize a joint. So that example is like the simplest example. Yep. But you're always doing co-contraction all the time. In order to stand upright, you're co-contracting. The multifidi in your spine, your deep abdominal muscles, all your postural muscles, they're co-contracting to stabilize and keep you upright, move around. You walking, you're co-contracting around your knee, low-grade co-contraction. Explosive co-contraction or like high-grade co-contraction has to happen when you're lifting something heavy. So that's like bracing. Like if I brace my abs, if you learned about bracing or you're using a lifting belt, that's co-contraction. I'm holding still a bunch of joints all together. If I'm squeezing a muscle, that's co-contraction around a joint. Now, you have two main types of co-contraction. You have static co-contraction, which is what we just did at your elbow. If you flex your bicep and your tricep equally together, your elbow stays still and it won't move. That's static co-contraction. Then you have dynamic co-contraction, which is co-contraction through movement. Dynamic has two categories underneath of it. You have rhythmic dynamic co-contraction, which is what we were just describing with the shoulder tube. If you think of, you've used a shoulder tube and you're wobbling that thing around, you're going like the muscles around your shoulder are going top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom. So they are co-contracting in like an alternating rhythmic way, like an engine. Yes,
if you've seen somebody tap dance, that is rhythmic co-contraction. That's literally what it is. Imagine that vibration of like the tempo. That's what it is.
Yeah. So rhythmic co-contraction is when muscles are twitching and flicking on and off together, like in a rhythmic way. Dynamic co-contraction that is not rhythmic is something like I am lowering a bench press eccentrically on a 5 count. I'm going to have to be co-contracting to stabilize my joints, but I'm carrying co-contraction through that range of motion. So that is co-contraction where the muscles are staying flexed. They are staying engaged, turned on cooperatively, but they're essentially sliding your joint under control past each other. It's like rolling a car down the hill with the brakes. Like you have your foot on the brake, but you let your foot off the brake just enough for the tires to start rolling, but your foot is still on the brake. That is dynamic co-contraction, but mobile. I'm moving through that co-contraction. So that's like bracing in a squat. That's like holding tension. Now, for the most part, dynamic rhythmic co-contraction is going to be your ticket to athleticism. That is elasticity personified. If you are trying to become an elastic, quote unquote, fast twitch athlete, you need to be able to rhythmically co-contract around joints because you need to be able to get relaxed just as fast as you can get flexed. I see a lot of athletes who get very, very strong who end up sort of self-sabotaging because all of their dynamic co-contraction is in that slow, sort of pseudo-static characteristic. So they only know how to filter motor skills through tension. They create co-contraction. They're very stable. They can hold co-contraction, and then they can carry it through movements. But you can't carry that motor pattern fast. You can't move quickly doing that because, like I said, it's like driving with the brakes on, which is great in certain cases. Like you need to have that in order to develop strength. You need to have that in order to develop tissue, right? If you want to grow muscle mass, you have to be able to do that. Sometimes guys have to be able to learn that motor skill before they can even get to rhythmic. It's like the path through because they don't know what co-contraction feels like at all anyway, right? So that that's something worth considering. But when you look at co-contraction, all that stuff is really important. And the dynamic versus static versus rhythmic, all really good to understand the differences and the use cases in a training program. Sometimes rhythmic co-contraction gets really eye-washing in training programs, but the hope is that you're informing a nervous system of what it feels like to move quickly through that, right? Common thing, we mentioned shoulder tube. If you've seen the tantrums, the band tantrums where people are like flutter kicking their legs, if you've seen people do that with their arm where they're like slapping something like really quickly, like those are all examples of like dynamic rhythmic co-contraction. The faster you can do that, the better in theory.
I think one of my favorite dynamic co-contractions is like a speed tricep with a band. You literally let the band do like the eccentric of a tricep, and then you do just the concentric. But at that point, you're literally using your bicep almost to try and beat the band back to the top. Yep. And like if you can get that rhythm down and teach your body how to like bam, bam, bam. It's the same thing when you do like an approach jump. If you're getting like feeling that ability to like carry linear velocity and then turn it into vertical velocity, linear force into vertical force, because you have to relax enough to catch and then whoop, go up. And that's like those are applications of like that kind of thing. But sometimes you aren't innately born with that. Like a lot of times you haven't moved fast enough, or you weren't, I don't know. My dad always had a saying. He's like, we used to teach kids how to skip in gym class, because if you can learn how to skip like properly, if you can learn how to cycle and skip and drive your knees, you're going to learn how to run more effectively. Like if you can get proficient at skipping, you'll be better at running. And I do think that there's part of that because you're building some like more rigidity, like intentionally skipping for height, skipping for distance, skipping for time, skipping quickly. And then when you get to running, you like can feel those kinds of things, especially if you're going to start sprinting. A lot of times guys just like kind of start running and they run really sloppy. And then you go, are you trying to like, can you be faster? Like, can you try and be faster? And they just like are flipping their feet around, or they don't know how to like get their torso to move quickly, or like actually that their arms, like driving your arms makes your legs go quicker. Like those kinds of things are all learned. They're learned patterns unless you're innately gifted with speed, which I was not. So I had to learn all of that to make myself faster so that my body would allow me to move quicker when I was on the mount. But yeah, that co-contraction of the water bag, I think it does have some legs. I still don't love it for pitching drills. I think it's kind of whatever. But I think the water bag does have uses. I never said that the water bag didn't have uses, period. I just said that I don't like it as like, this is an exercise we do every day because it's going to help you throw harder, and we don't know that. You can't definitively say that.
Yeah. We don't know. Something that I've it's a lot harder to find a place where you can do it, but it's kind of the same thing that people are trying to accomplish with like the speed twists with the water bag is the tornado ball. I have a couple of tornado balls in the weight room, but I haven't been able to use them in years because we used to get against the brick wall and just let it rip, and I got yelled at by my landlord. But if you're holding if you don't know what a tornado ball is, it looks like it's a hard plastic med ball, like an old school med ball with a rope attached to it, and you can hold on to the end of the rope with your back to the wall, and you can swing it and slam it on the wall like next to you, and it bounces off the wall. And then as it's bouncing off the wall, you rotate back the other direction and whip it and slam it against the wall on the other side. And so you're carrying, it bounces off the wall and it'll come off with some momentum, but you have to catch that momentum and whip. And so you're going like twitch, 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 twitch. And the faster you can whip it back and forth, the faster you can twitch and repeat that like rotational twitchy velocity thing. I love the tornado ball, but it's really hard to utilize in like a practical sense because one, you have to have a wall that you can stand against and do that on that's like sturdy enough and wide enough because it's what, a 3 foot rope, 4 foot rope. Yeah. It's kind of long. So you need like 9 feet of space. And then you need lots of space around you in front of you too, for the same reason, because it's arcing.
You don't kill somebody.
So you don't kill somebody. And so like it's not a big group tool. It's barely even a small group tool, and you have to have just the right facility environment to be able to use it. But if you do happen to have like a wall you can like really rip into and you have space, tornado ball, killer. And again, like the bouncy elasticity thing, you're not like waiting for it to like slosh over to the other side of the tube. It's more responsive off the wall. And so to me, that feels more like how I want that sensation to feel, where I'm like twitch, twitch, twitch. I'm not going like
waiting for the
water like sloshing around, you know? Like, you know when you get that, you know, you drink too much water and you get that uncomfortable feeling, it's sloshing around in your stomach?
It's the same thing, yeah.
It's like a water bag. It's like, feels like that, but on me. I don't know. It's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Well, I got to split, bud. I got to go treat some people.
All right, man.
All right.
Good pod.
Good work, everybody. Bye.
Bye.